Hey everybody, KC here. So this week at the Western Michigan University Annual Food Marketing Conference, one of the featured events was a conversation with Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo. And lucky me, I got to be the one who had the conversation with her. So we did it via Zoom, and it was featured at Wednesday's event. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the longer piece, I'm going to cut it into three parts, and I'm going to run them here on Morning Newsbeat over the next few days. So part one today, part two tomorrow, part three on Monday. Now today in our conversation, we're going to talk about a number of things. We're going to talk about the importance of both personal and professional networking, although she disputes my use of that word. We're going to talk about different kinds of CEOs and what an ideal CEO is like and how much attention employees should pay to who the CEO is of a company and what their values happen to be. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about lessons learned from COVID. So that's part one today. I hope you enjoy the first part of my conversation with Indra Nooyi. Indra Nooyi, welcome to the Western Michigan University Food Marketing Conference.
Great to be here, Kevin, and great to chat with you. Very, very nice to meet you.
So one of the things that really stood out for me in the book was the degree to which, both personally and professionally, you benefited from some amazing networks, some of which you created and some of which were there and you were able to take advantage of. And these networks really gave you the opportunity to find new challenges, and they threw new opportunities at you and challenged you every step of the way. So I guess my first question is, were you sort of aware of that as it was happening? And how do students, especially the students who are in the audience, how do they create those kinds of networks, or at least recognize their existence?
If I may, I'd probably reframe the word networks to saying mentors, because these were individuals who stepped up and decided that they wanted to support me, promote me, push me along. Give me strong feedback. I mean, let me tell you the number of times they've also critiqued me for what I was doing. And I honestly believe mentors, and I was one myself, mentors with a big capital M, Kevin. We pick mentees because we see something in them that makes us want to mentor them, because we think they're going to go places and we want to be able to say, hey, I had a little say in their success. And so I think if a person worked very hard on the job that they have, put the company before them, and did something unusual in the job, it attracts the attention of a lot of people. You're attracted to people who take on difficult assignments, who come up with creative solutions. And then mentors step up and say, you know what, I want to be part of this person's success. Now, I got to tell you, I'm in awe of all the mentors that I work with, because none of them felt threatened about me taking their job or me rising. They said, hey, if you rise and become a CEO, that's fine. We're going to bask in the glory of you having gotten there. So I think I was blessed with mentors who were very secure, who were relentless in pushing me, who saw the future and what I had to learn even before I did. Because you remember Steve Reinemund saying, I want you to learn the right of the decimal. Really think about the pennies and the fraction of the pennies that make a difference to costs. And so people gave me those assignments in unexpected ways, and I took them and I delivered on them. So I think you've got to do your job well and hope the right people are attracted to you.
For the people in the audience who haven't read the book yet, what he said to you, pay attention to the numbers on the right of the decimal point as opposed to the numbers to the left of the decimal point.
Which are in the millions and tens and the billions.
Which you had always paid more attention to, just exactly because that was what you did. So what do you think your mentors saw in you?
Well, I tell you, I go back to my first mentors in the textile company I was working for in India. I remember my first job when I got it. I was sitting in the office and I kept asking for the samples of all the textiles we'd produced. And they pointed me to a cupboard and said, it's in there. When I opened the cupboard, all that I saw was everything shoved into the cupboard. There was no system to organize it. I had no way of knowing what was what. So I said, good, what we're going to do is organize this cupboard. So I took out everything from the cupboard, literally sat on the floor. and spent 2 days creating my own system to catalog all of the samples. And that's when the chairman of the company walked in and said, I hear we have a new woman, management trainee. Where can I meet her? And they pointed to the floor and said, that's her. She's sitting on the floor. And he thought I was nuts. But I told him, look, unless I have a pretty good idea of what we've done so far, how the hell am I going to decide what we need to do? And I don't care about what the job is. I just want to get it done and get it done fast. So I'm just going to do it myself, sit on the floor and get it done, as opposed to waiting for some clerical staff to come and do this. So he just sat there saying, this is a different sort of a person who no job is beneath her if it's for the company and its success. So I didn't realize that's what he thought, but that's what he told me subsequently, that there was no time that you said this job is beneath me or I don't want to learn this part. If I had to crawl through textile mills, I crawled through textile mills. If I had to carry the samples and go see wholesalers, I did that. And so it was showing that you care about every job in the company, learning it from the ground up, and really putting the company before you.
So when you were looking for mentees or identifying mentees, did you always look for the same qualities in them, or were you looking for different qualities, or did they sort of just reach up and grab your attention because you weren't really looking for them?
That's another fantastic question. I looked at all the qualities I talked about because I wanted them to zoom into the details, into the big picture. But I also looked for people who had insatiable curiosity, because I thought the world was changing so much around us. And if people are not willing to be lifelong students and improve their basket of skills constantly, they would atrophy. So I looked for people who would ask those questions, ask the 5 whys, go off and read things, go off and explore, and come back and say, hey, I looked at these 4 industries and let me tell you what's going on and what the impact is on us. Could connect seemingly unconnected dots. So I looked for people with those unique skills.
It's interesting when you talked a minute ago about working for that textile company in India, and it was one of the things you talked about was that when you were out, basically a door-to-door salesperson, going to tailors, bringing them thread. I'm paraphrasing here, but you sort of figured out pretty early that you really weren't selling thread. You were selling them a way to create garments that were going to help people in their lives.
That's right.
I found that fascinating. I recently had the opportunity to interview the CEO of Albertsons, also from India.
Also a protege of one of my mentees.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
Vivek is one of my mentees.
Okay. So he tells the story about how his first job was actually selling printer ink in India to little roadside stands that had Xerox machines and printers.
Yep.
And then he figured out very quickly that he wasn't selling ink. He was selling a way for these people to live their lives.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think that's so important in businesses to realize that whatever it is if you're in the supermarket business, you're not selling food, you're selling aspiration, you're selling nutrition, you're selling nourishment. And it's not food nourishment, there's something broader going on there.
Kevin, that actually makes you feel more responsible and elevates the importance of your job. And so you take it more seriously and you have that healthy fear in your tummy saying, I want to make sure I do a good job, because my job is more than just pushing something. It's to actually enable people to live and have a livelihood.
So you had a number of different kinds of bosses at the different companies you had. You had Gerhard Schulmeyer at Motorola and ABB, Roger Enrico and Steve Reinemund at PepsiCo. And one of the things you do in the book is you talk about their very different styles of leadership. And then you have your own style of leadership. So I'm curious, is there an ideal set of characteristics for a CEO? I'm sure some of it depends on the situation in which you find yourself, if you're, and what kind of state the company is in. But are there certain characteristics that a good CEO has? And then to what degree, and again, this is especially for the students, do you think students should pay attention to whoever the leader is, to whatever their style is, when they're choosing places they want to work?
That's, it's not too early to start developing your skills. Because, you know, when you become CEO, you're not developing the skills at that point. Nobody's picking you because you're going to develop the skills. They pick you to be CEO because you've got a portfolio of skills that make you suitable to be a CEO. And let me go through what I think are the critical skills. The first is competence. Nobody hires a CEO who's not competent. You've got to have domain expertise in the industry you're in, but you've got to be just supremely good at understanding the business and knowing what the levers are. But more important than competence, along with that competence, has to be the task of simplifying the complex. You know, sometimes people talk in such mumbo jumbo, Kevin, you don't even know what they're talking about. It's being able to talk in simple terms, convey your competence in a simple term. So that's the first skill. The second is insatiable curiosity. You know, the only way you keep your competence alive is through curiosity. And I add the word insatiable curiosity because the world is changing in so many ways. Look at the way technology is going. And if you don't have curiosity on how to adapt and adopt those technologies, you'll be lost. So I think insatiable curiosity is a critical part of keeping that competence going. Then you've got to have courage and confidence. You know, I know many competent people who are very curious, but they don't have a backbone and they're not confident. So when you don't have that, nobody's going to follow you. So you've got to develop an ability to stand by what you know and defend it. Communication skills are another very important skill because you know this well. All of us CEOs have to stand in front of large groups and communicate to people. You start at a young age, get on stage, participate in debating competitions, develop self-confidence. Character, critically important. Integrity, your compass has to point true north. You and I know there is nothing called half integrity or 90% integrity. It's a 0 or 100 thing. So these are all this basket of skills that you have to have if you want to become a CEO. And the new one I would be adding now is coaching. If you don't develop your next generation of people, if you don't coach them and develop them, then you're a failed CEO.
Is EQ as important as IQ?
EQ is very important, but EQ without IQ is worthless. That's why I start with competence and then end with coaching, because coaching requires EQ. You've got to really understand what makes a person tick and tailor whatever you're doing to them.
That's interesting. So EQ is worthless without IQ, but is IQ worthless without EQ? Does it go the other way?
I've thought about that. I'm surprised you asked that question. I think IQ without EQ makes you an individual contributor. IQ with EQ makes you a leader.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, that was funny because I was, one of the questions we have from one of the students, Emma Kite, she wanted to ask you how you define leadership, and also, did you always see yourself as a leader? Was that in your definition of yourself, even when you were on the lower rungs of the companies where you worked?
Only when I was writing the book. I'll tell you why, because I was thinking back to my school days. When we were forming the rock band, I got together with my friends and said, let's go form a rock band. Okay. Or forming a cricket team in college when women never played cricket. I said, come on, guys, we can do it. And people followed me. So in retrospect, you say, hey, I did things that were sort of leadership in nature very early in my life. But when you're doing it then at such a young age, you don't think of it as a leadership moment. You just think of it as, I had fun. I formed a band. We sang rock and roll songs. We played cricket. You don't think of these as seminal leadership moments. But when you're writing the book, you go, maybe all these moments gave you confidence that you could actually mobilize people. You could make them do the impossible. You can make them aspire for things they never thought could be attained. So in retrospect, it feels good. And
when you think so in other words, you weren't defining yourself that way, but you were acting it out, and then it came to define you over a period of time.
Yeah. I think it's because even when I was in leadership positions, I acted as one of my people.
Right.
It would not be unusual for me to sit with my team and work through analysis myself, because my point is, this is not about you do the analysis and give it to me and I will draw conclusions. I wanted to understand the numbers. I wanted to understand the analysis. I would just sit with my people and say, hey, let's look at this together. So I was one of them and the leader.
Yeah, you tell a great story in the book about how at one point you flew to Europe to sit down with a team to help them prepare a presentation that they were actually going to make to you in a week.
Yeah.
That's being
And
one of the
I asked them, I said, isn't this crazy that I flew all the way, gave up my weekend? And they said, you know what? Today you're Indra, our coach. On Wednesday, you're going to be Indra, the president and CFO. And we want to look good in front of her. I said, okay, fine.
So we have a question from John Phillips, who works at a company you may be familiar with called PepsiCo. And his question is, the pandemic created a new work environment in which remote work was the rule, and maybe is the rule, which changed the ways companies and employees viewed the office and the notion of work-life balance. The business world now has many people in it who never want to go back to the office. They love remote working. Not everybody feels that way. How do you think leaders should approach this issue, and how important to your mind is work-life balance? Because I asked that question in part because reading your book, didn't seem to me you thought a lot about work-life balance. I mean, you may have thought about it, but you were very focused on the work.
I was living it. First of all, John Phillips is an extraordinary talent, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And I was privileged to work with him. Kevin, when I was coming through my corporate life, we had no technology like Zoom or anything of that sort. The smartphone didn't exist in the early days, and internet was in its early infancy. So now we take it for granted, but none of those things existed. I grew up in the time of yellow pages. My kids don't know what the yellow pages are. So you see the big difference. So everything we had to do, for example, if I had to talk to my employees in a foreign country, I had to travel. If my kid's school called with a problem, I had to get to school. There was no FaceTime or texting. So it was always the great juggling. Every priority was being juggled up in the air every day. The priorities were changing based on the issues of the day. And you just hope you don't drop any of those priorities. But I loved coming to work. I loved the interaction with people, the human connections. Innovation thrived, ideas flowed. When you walk in corridors and pop your head into rooms, you saw people interacting. You could develop a company culture. You watched how people developed others. So I'm all for that human interaction. Now, fast forward to today. You can actually have balance because with technologies, you can do some flexible working, not everything. Remember, your factory workers still have to come to work. People who go to the offices can actually have some flexible work, and you can actually balance work and family because you can come home, take your kids off the bus, and then continue working via remote technologies. So I think the new technologies give you an opportunity to balance work and family a little better. But I'd suggest one thing. Let's not swing the pendulum to completely flexible work or totally everybody should come back. I think the next year is for experimentation. What's the right model for the future of work for different work groups? Yeah. How many days do you come in? How many days do you not come in? When can you work flexibly? When can you not? Because if we swing the pendulum too much one way or the other, we don't have enough data to make decisions. How will we develop a corporate culture? What is the impact on productivity? There are some that would argue that working flexibly adds to productivity. I think the jury is still out. So I think the next year is experimenting with different models, sharing best practices, and deciding what the best model is for companies and work groups.
It is interesting. Companies do have the opportunity to sort of rethink their cultures and recreate their cultures with this new reality. Although it's interesting, you talk about people in the offices being able to do it, people in factories not being able to do it. But I would imagine companies that have both components as part of them have to be careful about not creating a bifurcated culture.
Absolutely, two classes of citizens.
Yeah, because all these people in the factory are going, what do you mean?
Think of the truck drivers, think of the route salesmen. Look at all the truck drivers who stock the shelves. Right. I don't think the idea is to say all of you have to get to work every day, rain, snow, or shine, but the office worker can roll out of bed, get on a Zoom and do their job. That's not what we intend.
We have also the question from Rick Brindle of Mondelez, who wants to know, as we sort of emerge from the pandemic, and you have not been a CEO during the pandemic.
That's right.
And I don't know if you sit there and go, whew, I'm glad I dodged that bullet. But when you look at what industry has gone through, do you see lessons where, as you look back, you say, yeah, those are lessons that we learned from the pandemic that we can now apply to business going forward?
To be honest, food and beverage thrived in the pandemic because anything you put on the shelf was taken, people bought it because people were so afraid of shortages that they stocked their pantries. And so I think, in a way, COVID generated tailwinds. Innovation went down because people didn't see any need to innovate because people were not coming into the store. People, advertising during COVID went down a lot, if you notice, for food and beverage in particular, because there was no need to. The challenge during COVID was making sure your supply chain was robust. And making sure enough people coming to work because people were getting COVID too. It was a different sort of a challenge. But I will tell you, COVID in many ways gave the food and beverage industry tremendous tailwinds. That's why you saw such extraordinary growth from all the companies. And tailwinds with lower assortment, lower complexity in the assortment is a winning proposition. Yeah. If you had enough people and enough raw materials. Yeah. And if you look forward, I think, at least I hope, people made their supply chains more robust through COVID, so that as they emerge from COVID, they're stronger.
And I've been observing all along that retailers, especially were able to, especially in the food industry, so many of them were able to innovate at a much faster pace than they ever would have before the pandemic, because they didn't think of it as being innovation. They thought about it as being survival.
Right.
And I think the challenge, because, so they didn't do focus groups, they didn't have committees, they didn't, right? They just did it, see if it worked. Right. And I think the challenge for a lot of businesses is to maintain that kind of momentum going forward.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, but, you saw a lot of innovation and people doing good things. E-commerce came into its own. All companies started their .com businesses. So a lot of good things happened during COVID too, but I wouldn't wish COVID on anybody, anytime.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of part one. Part two tomorrow. I hope you'll come back and join us.